Evidently, the private investigator had made use of a rather unethical stratagem, posing as an actual detective in order to get Jonas to talk. This did not bother Fisk in Chicago. It was enough to get his grasp on something tangible at last, enough to make him send Purvis another payment, with instructions to keep up the search for Ambrose Dexter. Several months passed in waiting. Then, in late spring, came the news Fisk had waited for. Dr. Dexter was back, and he had returned to his house on Benefit Street. The boards had been removed, furniture vans arrived to discharge their contents, and a manservant appeared to answer the door and to take telephone messages. Dr. Dexter was not at home to the investigator, or to anyone. He was, it appeared, recuperating from a severe illness contracted while in government service. He took a card from Purvis and promised to deliver a message, but repeated calls brought no indication of a reply. Nor did Purvis, who conscientiously cased the house and neighborhood, ever succeed in laying eyes upon the doctor himself or in finding anyone who claimed to have seen the convalescent physician on the street. Groceries were delivered regularly, mail appeared in the box, lights glowed in the Benefit Street house nightly until all hours. As a matter of fact, this was the only concrete statement Purvis could make regarding any possible irregularity in Dr. Dexter's mode of life. He seemed to keep electricity burning 24 hours a day. Fisk promptly dispatched another letter to Dr. Dexter, and then another. Still no acknowledgement. Our reply was forthcoming, and after several more unenlightening reports from Purvis, Fisk made up his mind. He would go to Providence and see Dexter somehow, come what may. He may be completely wrong in his suspicions. He may be completely wrong in his assumption that Dr. Dexter could clear the name of his dead friend. He might be completely wrong in even surmising any connection between the two. But for 15 years, he had brooded and wondered, and it was time to put an end to his own inner conflict. Accordingly, late that summer, Fisk wired Purvis of his intentions and instructed him to meet him at the hotel upon his arrival. Thus it was that Edmund Fisk came to Providence for the last time, on the day that the Giants lost, on the day that the Langer brothers lost their 2 Black Panthers, on the day that the cab driver, William Hurley, was in a garrulous mood. Purvis was not at the hotel to meet him, but such was Fisk's own frenzy of impatience that he decided to act without him and drove, as we have seen, to Benefit Street in the early evening. As the cab departed, Fisk stared up at the paneled doorway, stared at the lights blazing from the upper windows of the Georgian structure. A brass nameplate gleamed on the door itself, and the light from the windows played upon the legend Ambrose Dexter, M.D. Slight as it was, this seemed a reassuring touch to Edmund Fisk. The doctor was not concealing his presence in the house from the world, however much he might conceal his actual person. Surely the blazing lights and the appearance of the nameplate augured well. Fisk shrugged, rang the bell. The door opened quickly. A small, dark-skinned man with a slight stoop appeared and made a question of the word. Yes? Dr. Dexter, please. The doctor is not in to callers. He is ill. Would you take a message, please? Certainly, the dark-skinned servant smiled. Tell him that Edmund Fisk of Chicago wishes to see him at his convenience for a few moments. I have come all the way from the Middle West for this purpose, and what I have to speak to him about would only take a moment or two of his time. Wait, Please." The door closed. Fix stood in the gathering darkness and transferred his briefcase from one hand to the other. Abruptly, the door opened again. The servant peered at him. "Mr. Fisk, are you the gentleman who wrote the letters?" "Letters? Oh, yes, I am. I did not know the doctor ever received them." The servant nodded. "I could not say, but Dr. Dexter said if you were the man who had written him, you were to come right in." Fisk permitted himself an audible sigh of relief as he stepped over the threshold. It had taken 15 years to come this far, and now, just go upstairs if you please. You'll find Dr. Dexter waiting in the study, right at the head of the hall. Edmund Fisk climbed the stairs, turned at the top to a doorway, and entered a room in which the light was an almost palpable presence, so intense was its glare. And there, rising from a chair beside the fireplace, was Dr. Ambrose Dexter. Fisk found himself facing a tall, thin, immaculately dressed man who may have been 50, but who scarcely looked 35. A man whose wholly natural grace and elegance of movement concealed the sole incongruity of his aspect, a very deep suntan. "So you were Edmund Fisk." The voice was soft, well modulated, and unmistakably New England, and the accompanying handicap hand clasp, warm and firm. Dr. Dexter's smile was natural and friendly. White teeth gleamed against the brown background of his features. "Won't you sit down?" invited the doctor. He indicated a chair and bowed slightly. Fisk couldn't help but stare. There was certainly no indication of any present or recent illness in his host's demeanor or behavior. As Dr. Dexter resumed his own seat near the fire and Fisk moved around the chair to join him, he noted the bookshelves on either side of the room. The size and shape of several volumes immediately engaged his rapt attention, so much that he hesitated before taking a seat, and instead expected the titles of the tomes. For the first time in his life, Edmund Fisk found himself confronting the half-legendary De Vermis Mysteriis, the Liber Ivonis, and the almost mythical Latin version of the Necronomicon. Without seeking his host's permission, he lifted the bulk of the latter volume from the shelf and rifled through its yellow pages of the Spanish translation of 1622. Then he turned to Dr. Dexter. All traces of his carefully contrived composure dropped away. "Then it must have been you who found these books in the church," he said. "In the rear vestry room, beside the asp. Lovecraft mentioned him in his story, and I've wondered what became of them." Dr. Dexter noted gravely. "Yes, I took them. I did not think it wise for such books to fall into the hands of the authorities. You know what they contain, and what might happen if such knowledge were wrongfully employed." Fisk reluctantly replaced the great book on the shelf and took a chair facing the doctor before the fire. He held his briefcase on his lap and fumbled uneasily with the clasp. "Don't be uneasy," said Dr. Dexter with a kindly smile. "Let us proceed without fencing. You are here to discover what part I played in the affair of your friend's death. Yes, there are some questions I wanted to ask. Please." The doctor raised a slim brown hand. "I am not in the best of health and can give you only a few minutes. Allow me to anticipate your queries and tell you what little I know." "As you wish." Fisk stared at the bronzed man, wondering what lay behind the perfection of his poise. "I met your friend, Robert Harrison Blake, only once," said Dr. Dexter. "It was on an evening during the latter part of July 1935. He called upon me here as a patient." Fisk leaned forward eagerly. "I never knew that," he exclaimed. "He was merely a patient. He claimed to be suffering from insomnia. I examined him, prescribed a sedative, and acting on the merest surmise, asked if he had recently been subjected to any unusual strain or trauma. It was then that he told me the story of his visit to the church on Federal Hill. and of what he'd found there. I must say that I had the acumen not to dismiss his tale as the product of a hysterical imagination. As a member of one of the older families here, I was already acquainted with the legends surrounding the Starry Wisdom sect and the so-called Haunter of the Dark. Young Blake confessed to me certain of his fears containing the shining trapezohedron, intimidating that it was the focal point of a primal evil. He further admitted his own dread of being somehow linked to the monstrosity in the church. Naturally, I was not prepared to accept this last premise as a rational one. I attempted to assure the young man, advised him to leave Providence and forget it. And, at the time, I acted in all good faith. Then in August came news of Blake's death. So you went to the church, Fisk said. Wouldn't you have done the same thing, parried Dr. Dexter? If Blake had come to you with his story, told you what he feared, wouldn't his death have moved you to action? I assure you, I did what I thought best. Rather than provoke a scandal, rather than expose the general public to needless fears, rather than permit the possibility of danger to exist, I went to the church. I took the books. I took the shining tetrahedron from under the noses of the authorities, and I chartered a boat and dumped the accursed thing in the Narragansett Bay, where it could no longer possibly harm mankind. The lid was up when I dropped it, for as you know, only darkness can summon the haunter. And now the stone is eternally exposed to light. But that is all I can tell you. I regret that my work in recent years has prevented me from seeing or communicating with you before this. I appreciate your interest in the affair and trust my remarks will help to clarify in a small way your bewilderment. As to young Blake and my capacity as an examining physician, I will gladly give you written testimony to my belief in his sanity at the time of his death. I'll have it drawn up tomorrow and send it to your hotel if you give me the address. Fair enough. The doctor rose, signifying that the interview was over. Fisk remained seated, shuffling his briefcase. Now, if you'll excuse me, the physician murmured. In a moment, there are still one or two brief questions I appreciate your answering. Certainly, if Dr. Dexter was irritated, he gave no sign. Did you by any chance see Lovecraft before or during his last illness? No, I was not his physician. In fact, I never met the man. Though, of course, I knew of him and his work. What caused you to leave Providence so abruptly after the Blake affair? My interest in physics superseded my interest in medicine. As you may or may not know, during the past decade or more, I have been working on problems relative to atomic energy and nuclear fission. In fact, starting tomorrow, I am leaving Providence once more to deliver a course of lectures before the faculties of Eastern universities and certain governmental groups. That is very interesting to me, Doctor, said Fisk. By the way, did you ever meet Einstein? As a matter of fact, I did. Some years ago. I worked with him on... But no matter. I must beg you to excuse me now. At another time, perhaps, we can discuss such things. His impatience was unmistakable now. Fisk rose, lifting his briefcase in one hand and reaching out to extinguish a table lamp with the other. Dr. Dexter crossed swiftly and lighted the lamp again. Why are you afraid of the dark, Doctor? Asked Fisk softly. I'm not. For the first time, the physician seemed on the verge of losing his composure. What makes you think that? He whispered. It's the shining trapezohedron, isn't it? Fisk continued. When he threw it into the bay, you acted too hastily. You didn't remember at the time that even if you left the lid open, the stone would be surrounded by darkness there at the bottom of the channel. Perhaps the haunter didn't want you to remember. You looked into the stone, just as you threw the thing, just as Blake did, and established the same psychic linkage. And when he threw that thing away, you gave it into perpetual darkness, where the haunter's power would feed and grow. That's why you left Providence, because you were afraid the haunter would come to you just as it came to Blake, and because you knew that that thing would remain abroad forever. Dr. Dexter moved toward the door. I must definitely ask that you leave now, he said. If you're implying that I keep the lights on because I'm afraid of the haunter coming after me by the way it did Blake, then you're mistaken. Fisk smiled wryly. That's not it at all, he answered. I know you don't fear that, because it's too late. The haunter must have come to you long before this, perhaps within a day or so after you gave it power by consigning the trapezohedron to the darkness of the bay. It came to you, but unlike the case of Blake, it did not kill you. It used you. That is why you fear the dark. You fear it as the haunter itself fears being discovered. I believe that in the darkness you look different, more like the old shape, because when the haunter comes to you, it did not kill, but instead merged. You are the haunter of the dark, Mr. Fisk, really. There's no Dr. Dexter. There hasn't been any such person for many years now. There's only the outer shell possessed by an entity older than the world, an entity that is moving quickly and cunningly to bring destruction to all mankind. It was you who turned scientist and insinuated yourself into the proper circles, hinting and prompting and assisting foolish men in their sudden discovery of nuclear fission. When the first atomic bomb fell, how you must have laughed. And now you've given them the secret of the hydrogen bomb, and you're going on to teach them more, show them new ways to bring about their own destruction. It took me years of brooding to discover the clues, the keys to the so-called wild myths that Lovecraft wrote about, for he wrote in parable and allegory, but he wrote the truth. He has set it down in black and white time and time again. The prophecy of your coming to Earth, Blake knew it at the last when he identified the haunter by its rightful name, and that is, snapped the doctor, Nyarlathotep. The brown face creased into a grimace of laughter. I'm afraid you're a victim of the same fantasy projections as poor Blake and your friend Lovecraft. Everyone knows that Nyarlathotep is pure invention, part of the Lovecraft mythos. I thought so until I found the clue in his poem. That is when it all fitted in. The haunter of the dark, your fleeing, and your sudden interest in scientific research, Lovecraft's words took on a new meaning. And, at the last, from inner Egypt came the strange dark one, to whom the fellows bowed. Fisk chanted the lines, staring at the dark face of the physician. Nonsense. If you must know, the dermatological disturbance of mine is the result of exposure to radiation at Los Alamos. Fisk did not heed. He was continuing Lovecraft's poem. That wild beasts followed him and licked his hands. Soon, from the sea a noxious birth began. Forgotten lands with weedy spires of gold. The ground was cleft, and mad auroras rolled down on the quaking citadels of man, then crushing what he chanced to mold in play. The idiot chaos blew Earth's dust away. Dr. Dexter shook his head. Ridiculous on the face of it, he asserted. Surely even in your upset condition, you can understand that, man. The poem has no literal meaning. Do wild beasts lick my hands? Is something rising from the sea? Are there earthquakes and auroras? Nonsense. You're suffering from a bad case of what we call atomic jitters. I can see it now. You're preoccupied, as so many laymen are today, with the foolish obsession that somehow our work in nuclear fission will result in the destruction of the Earth. All this rationalization is a product of your imaginings. Fisk held his briefcase tightly. I told you it was a parable, this prophecy of Lovecraft's. God knows what he knew or feared, whatever it was. It was enough to make him cloak his meaning. And even then, perhaps, they got to him, because he knew too much. They from outside, the ones you serve, you are their messenger. Nyarlathotep, you came, in linkage with the shining trapezohedron, out of inner Egypt, as the poem says. And the fellows, the common workers of Provence, who became converted to the Starry Wisdom sect, bowed before the strange Dark One they worshipped as the Haunter. The trapezohedron was thrown into the bay, and soon from the sea came this noxious birth. Your birth or incarnation in the body of Dr. Dexter, and you taught men new methods of destruction with atomic bombs, in which the ground was cleft, and mad auroras rolled down on the quaking citadels of men. Oh, Lovecraft knew what he was writing, and Blake recognized you too. And they both died. I suppose you'll try to kill me now so that you can go on. You'll lecture and stand at the elbows of the laboratory men, urging them on and giving them new suggestions to result in greater destruction. And finally, you'll blow Earth's dust away. Please, Dr. Dexter held out both hands, control yourself. Let me get you something. Can't you realize this whole thing is absurd? Fisk moved toward him, hands fumbling at the clasp of the briefcase. The flap opened, and Fisk reached inside, and then withdrew his hand. He held a revolver now. Then he pointed it quite steadily at Dr. Dexter's breast. Of course, it's absurd, Fisk muttered. No one ever believed in the Starry Wisdom sect except a few fanatics, and some ignorant foreigners. No one ever took Blake's stories or Lovecraft's, or mine, for that matter, as anything but a rather morbid form of amusement, by the same token that no one will ever believe there is anything wrong with you, or with so-called scientific investigation of atomic energy, or other horrors you plan to lose on the world, to bring about its doom, and that's why I'm going to kill you now. Put down that gun. Fisk began suddenly to tremble. His whole body shook in a spectacular spasm. Dexter noted it and moved forward. The younger man's eyes were bulging, and the physician inched toward him. Stand back, Fisk warned. The words were distorted by convulsive shuddering of his jaws. That's all I needed to know. Since you are in a human body, you can be destroyed by ordinary weapons. As so, I do destroy you. Nyarlathotep. His finger moved. So did Dr. Dexter's. His hand went swiftly behind him to the master light switch on the wall. A click, and the room was plunged into utter darkness. Not utter darkness, for there was a glow. The face and hands of Dr. Ambrose Dexter glowed with a phosphorescent fire in the dark. There are presumable forms of radium poisoning which can cause such an effect, and no doubt Dr. Dexter would have so explained the phenomenon to Edmund Fisk had he the opportunity. There was no opportunity. Edmund Fisk heard the click, saw the fantastic flaming features, and pitched forward to the floor. Dr. Dexter quietly switched on the lights, went over to the younger man's side, and knelt for a long moment. He sought a pulse in vain. Edmund Fisk was dead. The doctor sighed, rose, and left the room. In the hall downstairs, he summoned his servant. There has been a regrettable accident, he said. That young visitor of mine, a hysteric, suffered a heart attack, and you better call the police immediately. And then continue with the packing. We must leave tomorrow for the lecture tour. But the police may detain you. Dr. Dexter shook his head. I think not. It's a clear-cut case. In any event, I can easily explain. When they arrive, notify me. I shall be in the garden. The doctor proceeded down the hall, the rear exit, and emerged upon the moonlit splendor of the garden behind the house on Benefit Street. The radiant vista was walled off from the world, utterly deserted. The dark man stood in the moonlight, and its glow mingled with his own aura. At this moment, two silken shadows leaped over the wall. They crouched in the coolness of the garden and then slithered forward toward Dr. Dexter. They made panting sounds. In the moonlight, they recognized the shapes of two black panthers. He recognized shapes of two black panthers. Immobile, he waited as they advanced, padding purposefully toward him, eyes aglow, jaws slavering and agape. Dr. Dexter turned away. His face was turned in mockery to the moon. As the beasts fawn before him and licked his hands. Now, one point about that is the evil magic. The knowledge of it is not just a matter of entertainment. It's a very serious endeavor.